Hello everybody and welcome to our live online subject spotlight economic session on what do we mean by a green recovery from the COVID-19 economic crisis. This is part of the University of Chester's online kitchen sessions programme. My name's Helen and I'm one of the schools and colleges liaison assistants here at the university, and today I'm joined by Dr Rosa Fernandez, who's programme lead for economics, who will be delivering the session. So you can say hello, Rosa.
Hello everybody.
You will see her shortly, and I'm also joined by Mags, who will be moderating any questions as they come in through the session. So you can say hello, Mags.
Hello everybody.
So in terms of how this will work today, I'm shortly going to hand over to Rosa for the presentation, and during the presentation you'll be given the opportunity to ask questions in the chat function on the right hand side of the screen. Your audio and video won't be shared, but you can ask questions anonymously if you wish. You just need to have ticked the box to say you wish to be anonymous. You can like other questions that people may have asked, and you can answer any questions that Rosa may ask by responding in the chat function. Mags will collate any questions and ask Rosa those at the end of the session. At the very end of the session, you'll also have the opportunity to complete a short evaluation form, and any links that we put up during the presentation will be put in the chat function. Okay, so that's the housekeeping. I think we're quite ready to start. So I'm now going to hand over to you, Rosa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Hello everybody. I hope you are okay. And thank you for attending this session on what do we mean by a green recovery from the COVID economic crisis. Obviously, a very up-to-date topic. So it's not that we are going to be offering the holy grail of solutions here, but an overview of what COVID means for the economy worldwide, in particular, some of the projections that international institutions have been presenting over the last months about what may come. And since we are in a second wave currently, there is still a lot to come. And the bulk of the presentation, or the key part, is going to be the last part, the suggested green recovery. And what we are going to see particularly are the reasons why there is such a huge cry these days for a recovery that needs to be green. So without further ado, I think probably most of you have heard a lot about COVID because it's everywhere in the news, and it's obviously first and foremost a health crisis. The important thing is that because it's so massive, it's so extended to almost every country in the world, and is lasting so long, it has far too many undesired consequences, socioeconomic consequences and socioeconomic ramifications. And it is quite possible that some of the effects that COVID is causing are not going to disappear in the longer term. And part of what we know today about how the world works, and particularly how the economy works, are going to be changed forever. So obviously, because it's something that is still happening, we cannot fully assess the effects and how things are going to be at the end of it. But we can see several things that are quite obvious. The first thing, if you look at the graph that you have in the center of the slide, is that this crisis, from the economic point of view, is far worse than the economic crisis and financial crisis that we suffered in 2007, 2008, from which there are countries that still have not fully recovered. So it is estimated at the moment that the negative effects from the economic point of view are at least 3 times worse in this particular crisis. We have seen almost every day the consequences of businesses closing down, economic activities that are not continuing, and we have seen the aviation sector, we have seen the high streets with empty shops and the like. But one of the first things that was noticed in the first months of the crisis, once lockdown measures started kicking off, was obviously that people stopped traveling worldwide, but also domestically. People started working from home, and let's say movement in general was something not allowed, and that had a huge consequence for a sector that had been very important for many countries for a long period of time, and that is the energy sector. We have been demanding much less oil and natural gas in particular, and that has meant that the prices of those commodities, those products, have gone down by quite a lot. This was something initially temporary, but a very, very deep effect. And we cannot forget that there are a good number of countries still today that have exporting oil and gas as their main economic activity. So for them, having prices so low would have an impact that would be very extensive in their economies. The prices of oil and gas have gone up a little bit, but they are still low. And obviously entering in a second lockdown, which is what we are doing now in many countries at different levels, would mean that we are going to see very similar effects again. It is quite obvious that the effects that each economy is suffering is not going to be the same as any other. And this is simply because each country is different. Each country has different economic sectors with different levels of importance. And as such, the effects are going to be noticed by different groups in the society, by different types of employees, by different types of companies more strongly than in others. So we have, for instance, in general, all the countries that tend to live with tourism as one of their main economic activities are going to be affected very negatively. We have seen that in terms of less developed countries or countries with middle income, or like the Caribbean countries, being heavily affected when international travel was halted. So this is something that still affect a lot of countries. But for instance, if you look at more industrialized or more developed countries, we have countries such as France or Spain, for which the touristic activity is extremely important in their economies. And the predictions of the OECD at the moment are that Spain is within the OECD group, the country that has lost the most. So differences, there are many, and what we are seeing as well is that inequalities of who suffer more or less with this crisis are also unequally distributed among members of each country. Something that has become very apparent is that women are more negatively affected, particularly because women tend to work more in sectors of the economy that are considered informal economy. So that type of sector is one of the most affected by loss of employment. So this is something that probably will have longer term effects from the social point of view, and obviously the reduction of income in many families. So at the moment, it is estimated that the equivalent to 400 million jobs were lost during the second quarter of 2020, and those are to be added to 155 million jobs lost during the first quarter, the first 3 months of 2020. But as I'm saying, you have images here about different countries, developed countries, where the figures have gone not too well. And you can see here that at this point, the UK is not one of the worst affected, but we have worldwide some sectors that have been hit harder than others. So some of the sectors with the biggest losses at the moment are particularly commercial aerospace and anything that has to do with air and travel, as it would be expected, but also perhaps something that people would not expect so much, banks, obviously the oil and gas industry that we have been mentioning before, the insurance sector as well. Obviously, if people cannot travel and you have travel insurance, these companies have been involved in having to pay some claims, compensations and the like. The real estate sector, obviously, if people are in lockdowns, they cannot go and visit houses to buy new houses. If we are in a lockdown, we have seen that a lot of clothes have not been sold. People are not going on holidays, or at least not as much as they did in the past, in previous years. So people are not spending the money in things that you would expect. Anything related to transport and infrastructure has also been affected. And you could, for instance, take the example of transport for London, with the Metro of London having to be bailed out because it didn't have enough money, it was making losses. But as I said, not all the sectors are being affected the same, and we have sectors that are gaining, particularly those related to high tech, high technology. We all use more computers, internet, work from home, like attending one of these series of lectures, but obviously, since this is mostly and primarily a health crisis, everything related to healthcare, supply and distribution, and the pharmaceutical companies, particularly those that are involved in getting a vaccine, have seen how their value has increased quite considerably. Some of those companies have increased their value in more than 30% during this crisis. So perhaps it's something to make us think of which sectors we can think of that employment is going to be moving in the future. What is it expected that is going to happen next? Obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty, and the figures that you see here are from an article that has just been published this last month, with projections about the possible growth in GDP in a number of countries around the world. And what you can see here in the red line that is in each of the graph, we see the central medium value of the predictions about the growth of GDP between the beginning of this year, 2020, and the end of next year, 2021. And what you can see is that, with the exception of China, most parts of the world are going to be still in negative levels of GDP growth. Comparatively speaking, if you realize, for instance, the euro area is expected to do a little bit better than the UK and the United States or the Asia Pacific area. So we have different projections, and obviously this has always certain level of uncertainty, but the idea is that it's going to take quite some time for economies to go back to what was considered normal or a path of positive economic growth, because the initial dip, the initial loss was very, very deep. So if we go beyond next year, some scenarios developed by international institutions like the OECD or the International Monetary Fund predict that we are not going to go back to situations of economic growth like the pre-COVID era until 2023. And in some aspects, it is expected that the pandemic is going to cause a reversion of progress that have been made since the 1990s, particularly to contribute to the reduction of poverty worldwide, which is one of the main targets in the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030. And that means that inequalities have become not only more visible, but more exacerbated during this pandemic. And this is visible almost in every country. What it is also expected, and I guess for everybody, is quite visible, because we have, for instance, the Chancellor speaking almost every week about new measures that are being approved. We had the Bank of England talking this morning about money being injected in the economy. What is going to happen is that in order to go back to levels of growth, what we are going to see is increased level of sovereign debt in all the countries, because all the governments are pumping a lot of money into the economy, some more than others. And the problem that we have here is that at the moment we have production, output, GDP generation, however you want to call it, that is reduced, that is still going to be reduced compared to the previous situation for an amount of time. And that means that if we are not producing, if we have people unemployed, all those people and all those businesses are not going to be paying taxes, which means that the tax base generated by the tax revenue that governments use to pay for public infrastructures and other investments are going to be reduced during these first years at least. And all the governments are going to see themselves constrained on what they can do, thinking of the longer term, because they are going to have to pay the sovereign debt obligations that they are accumulating during this period. So what it is expected is that most economies are going to be transformed. They are going to suffer, we are going to suffer structural changes with initially less investment, less growth in productivity, and that is already an issue in some countries, and less also in investment in both physical and human capital. So again, reducing the possibility of countries to be more productive in the longer term. So obviously, if in order to solve all these problems that we are seeing caused by COVID. A lot of experts from, and this is not about environmentalists or anybody else, this is about experts from all the financial and monetary institutions internationally, are calling for this green recovery type of a strategy, is because we are also seeing a relationship between what has happened with COVID, or is happening with COVID, and the environment. So in general, obviously, we have had less economic activity, and that particularly at the beginning when China entered into lockdown, we saw a huge reduction in CO2 emissions. But the problem is that the moment the economies started going out of the lockdown, emissions started growing again. So that initial relief was only temporary. And in any case, since we keep on producing, what we are doing is to increase the concentration of CO2 that is already in the atmosphere. With other type of air pollution, particulate matter, we saw something positive as well in terms of a temporary decline due to the decrease in industrial activity, decrease in transport, and particularly air travel. But what we are seeing is, again, that this was temporary, and we are seeing rising levels again. We also see a positive in environment in terms of water quality, particularly in waterways and coastal zones. However, on the other side, we also have negative impacts on the environment, because much more waste has been generated, and we have plenty more waste management challenges than we were anticipating at this point. We have had a lot of campaigns asking for the reduction of plastic waste and the like, but what we have is much more medical waste generated by all the PPE that is non-reusable. So we have an increased demand for single-use plastic. The capacity for recycling in countries has been reduced as well, and the price for recycled plastics has also declined. So we are not in the best situation. The other thing is that COVID, regardless of the different theories about how it was originated, has created more awareness of the fact that this is probably a sickness that has been transmitted initially from animals to humans. So that meant that the interaction and interference of human action with biodiversity has a role on it. So for all these reasons, and a good number of others, people are calling for a green recovery, a recovery that takes into consideration what to do with the environment. We also know that there is an important link between the levels of air pollution and mortality from COVID, and also that small increases on particulate matters are also associated with higher COVID-19 death rates, between 8 and 16%. So if we want to have a healthier environment and make the recovery of people's health from COVID, having a clean air is a clear contribution to it. We know that we have airborne transmission of the pandemic, and that is worsened by air pollution, which again exacerbates inequalities, because socially disadvantaged groups are more vulnerable, are more prone to live in more polluted areas. So if we act to create a situation and a way of creating economic growth that takes into consideration environment and climate change, since we are also into a climate emergency, what we will create is a more resilient society, a more resilient health system that could resist better future shocks in the economy, regardless of where they come from. And obviously, there is a huge potential for the creation of jobs associated to low carbon economies. And part of it has to do with renewable energies, but also with energy efficiency of buildings, electric cars, and many other sectors. Most of the measures, however, that countries are taking at the moment have been very mixed, and some of the grants and loans that have been provided and any type of subsidy or help, we have had some countries with part of those measures already targeting green sectors of the economy, but even in the same countries, we have other sets of measures that have been protecting polluting activities and polluting sectors of the economy. So far, because there is no a systematic approach to green recovery, almost we can see a cancelling of effects between positive and negatives, so no progress so far. So what are the main measures that are being suggested at the moment? Well, apart from green recovery, particularly in UK, you probably have heard of some terms used by the government, like building back better. And effectively, that means to have an approach that is more inclusive with everybody in the society. And that is based on 5 specific pillars, effectively to be trying to reach the target of net zero greenhouse gas emissions, strengthen the resilience to climate change, reduce biodiversity loss, innovate in order to create behavioral changes, and this is very important in all the individuals in the society, and improve the supply chain of everything we consume in terms of resilience and circularity, to create a circular economy instead of linear economy. So the main sectors where the measures need to be focused on, at least as recommended by most of the international institutions, as investments in health, to make health systems ready for things like we are suffering now, but also education and infrastructures, particularly those related to low carbon economies. So, for instance, have the systems prepared for electric cars, which we do not have at the moment, investment in research and innovation, and obviously to safeguard social spending to protect vulnerable segments of the population. However, we need to be very conscious about this level of debt that is going to be increasing in most countries. So there needs to be clear transparency about what that debt is in each country, what is the size of the debt, and what are the expectations of that debt to be paid for. The key, however, to do this, to make of this a success, is also international cooperation, because what we are seeing very clearly is that this is a global crisis. So individualistic solutions are not going to work, and international cooperation, particularly for the development of vaccines and making those vaccines available for everybody, whether we are a developed or not developed country or less developed country, is extremely important. And in terms of fiscal measures in particular, their recommendation is to reduce or eliminate the subsidies to sectors that are not associated to low carbon economies, and also bear in mind that any support measure that is disseminated now or implemented now needs to be gradually removed as we recover, because support measures cannot last forever. So hopefully this has given you some food for thought, and I will be happy to answer any question that you may have from now on. Thank you very much.
Oh, thanks for that, Rosa. It was great. Really informative and topical. So I'm just going to hand over to Mags to see if we had any questions through.
Hi Rosa, thank you for that. And yes, we do have a few questions through. So the first question is, what options or solutions are available that could address the imbalance of the impact of the crisis affecting women? And how could we prevent this happening in the future?
Ooh, very, very interesting question. Education is the main one, and also the recognition of women's role in the economy of all countries. At the moment, there is a huge difference in some countries to which type of employment women have access to. And there is difference to which level of education women have access to. So the first step for me would be obviously to make education at all levels accessible to women, and recognize in all countries the role of women as contributors to the economy. So it is very difficult because cultural differences in some countries are settled for centuries, and it's going to take time to change some attitude. But also I would like to encourage women to go for something that perhaps is a stereotype, and I see that luckily these things are changing, to go for training and for education into sectors where the new jobs are going to go, that are related to science and technology, data analysis and the like, that will give them more security about having economic stability and economic independence in the future. Hope that answers.
Thank you for that, Rosa. We've also had a few other questions in. So are there any examples of other countries who are taking a more effective approach to protecting their economy that countries can learn from?
There are not magic formulas anywhere. What we have seen in some countries is that the health measures, in a way, have been applied jointly to the whole country in one go, instead of some parts having some rules and some of the parts of the country having other rules. Those countries with unified solutions tend to have been doing better. The case of New Zealand can be an example of it. And economically speaking, obviously each country has different approaches to economic policies, and we can see, for instance, that countries like Germany or France are putting considerably more public money to give support to different sectors of the economy and citizens to survive during these difficult times, at least compared to the UK. Even if we are seeing unprecedented levels of money being put forward, other countries are putting even more. But this is because of the way in which the economic policies have been working in the UK for many decades.
So just a similar question to that. What is the likelihood of a double dip recession in countries where a second lockdown is taking place?
Well, again, I do not have a crystal ball, but the likelihood is that the second wave of coronavirus is more aggressive, is what we are seeing up to now. So economic disruption is likely to continue for a longer period of time that we may have expected. As I said, in some of the modeling, they were expecting a second wave early next year, and it's happening now. So countries entering in double dip recession, probably there would be some, but they will be more likely those countries whose economies are heavily dependent on particular sectors of the economy that are going to be more heavily or negatively affected by COVID. Spain is an example of a country that is going to have things very difficult because of the focus on tourism. But countries, for instance, where the manufacturing sector, car industry, aviation industry play a big role, are going to be affected more negatively as well.
So there's been quite a few questions related to investing and prioritising and protecting the economy. So quite a few people have been really interested in referring back to 2000, 2008, when a period of government-led austerity in the UK, which caused most harm to vulnerable groups, including welfare claimants, and disproportionately impacted women. Given how much has been spent on furlough and bailouts, do you think we will have to suffer austerity again in the UK?
Well, perhaps this is a mix of economics and politics type of question. Austerity is an economic policy option that proved to be counterproductive and very negative and extremely unpopular. So going back to that kind of austerity probably will be again counterproductive and definitely not well seen by the population. So I do not think that we will see a go back to austerity as we saw in the recession of 2007, 2008, because the social consequences of it are still too deep. What I expect that we will see is once we manage to go out of the deepest or more problematic part of a recession or crisis, or however you want to call it, is that the government of all countries are going to see an increase in the level of debt that the country has to pay. So if we don't want to take the risk of social care, social services, NHS, and the rest of public services that saw a decrease in funding in the past, I don't think we can go back. I don't think countries or the UK can afford a luxury of going back to those levels. What we are probably going to see is an increase in the level of taxes that we all pay to be able to afford a continuation of those services. And probably once the big impact of public intervention finish, there will be an expectation that the private sector will take over in terms of investment. So this becomes part of the uncertainty of our country is going to be attractive enough for the attraction of the necessary private investment.
One last question. It relates to your ending slides. What can we do as individuals to support a green recovery?
Oh, plenty of things. The first thing that I would say is about being used to a different type of life from the one that we have been having up to now. There is a need for a behavioral change in society in order to adapt to what is really sustainable. And as individuals, there are plenty of things that we can do to adopt more sustainable practices. It's quite likely that for instance, we won't go back to working in the office every day of the week and having to use transport every day of the week, but try to choose transport means that are more sustainable, our consumption habits to become more sustainable as well. Just think of what have you said goodbye to during these months in terms of things that you have been consuming that you really do not need. Do you really need to buy new clothes every 2 months? Do you really need to go to a trip to the other corner of the world to have a holiday? It's a question of adapting ourselves to different ways of life that are not necessarily and at all of lower quality, but we need to be mindful that the resources that we have in the planet are limited, and if we finish with them, then is when we run out of solutions and possibilities. So it's being mindful of how we use what we have.
So thank you everyone for your questions today. And some questions were grouped together because they were very similar. So apologies if your direct question was not answered, but hopefully Dr. Rosa Fernandez has covered anything that you were interested in today. So from me, there are no more questions.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Max. Thank you, Rosa. I particularly liked the last question and the answer, what we can all be doing as individuals. So thanks very much for your time, Rosa. Thank you everybody for attending. I'm just going to finish up now, summarise and tell you about some links that we've put in the chat for you. So if you wouldn't mind just going to the chat and filling in an evaluation form, it won't take you long. There's only 4 questions in there that would really help us for future sessions. We hope that you've enjoyed the session and you found it useful, and we look forward to your attendance at the next sessions. If you want to know what they are, you can visit our outreach webpage and the university website, and the link for that is also in the chat as well. Okay, so all that remains for me to say again is thank you, Rosa, thank you, Max, thank you everybody for attending. If you do have a few moments just at the end to complete that evaluation form, that would be really helpful. But thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.